Hello, beautiful community. We've got a new Prime Minister in the UK, Andy Burnham. And one question is, how should he speak? What does he need to say in order to defeat Nigel Farage and at the same time make Farage's voters feel included and feel like their grievances are being addressed? I'll do a policy chat about Burnham another time, but for now I want to look with you at the question of what somebody like him has got to say and how he's got to speak in order to address himself constructively to the rage and crisis of trust in the country. So let's rock and roll with this. Before rocking and rolling, though, I want to say one thing, and that is that there's an extra kind of pitfall for resistance liberals who do recognize that some of the policies they may have supported are now causing the likes of Trump, but still think that there's a kind of easy Fukuyamian fix to reset their country into some kind of left-leaning centrism. What do I mean by this? What I mean by this is there's a danger in thinking that somebody like Andy Burnham, who wants to decentralize power, for instance, can do that and thereby generate the kind of preferences from citizens that you might want to see. That's not how it works. In other words, you can decentralize power, you can supplement institutions, you can reform institutions, and give people a voice of a different kind in a different way. But they might still turn around and say, I like Trump and Farage. Yeah, and screw you because you've screwed up globalization, you've screwed up hyper-identity politics, you've screwed up immigration. So what you've got to understand is that, yes, we do need a lot of these systematic reforms in Western democracies, but they are not in of themselves going to fix the problem we have. All they are going to do is create the platform that could support us to successfully fix in part or entirely fail to fix the problem we've got. Right? So these are a basis for progress, right? They are not solutions. Okay, rant over. So I'm writing a little piece for tomorrow about how politicians speak to citizens in the crisis of trust, and you're going to help me sort of brainstorm my points into place by us talking together about what Andy Burnham needs to say to keep and restore in part, trust in democracy when it takes power. So the first thing I think that's completely obvious is that you've got to recognize that the crisis of trust we've just gestured at is real. And there is a tendency for people who are in denial of our historical moment to still say, well, no, it's just caused by bad behavior, disinformation and ignorance and malign foreign interference by the Russians and the Chinese. Well, there's some leverage in all of these points, but they don't explain what's going on as much as a social forces-based explanation does. Right? So you've got to understand that you're already lost if you want to go around telling voters that they need to wise up and that they're suffering from misinformation and that that's the core of the problem. Trust issues first, misinformation second. Right? The misinformation is as big a problem as it is because we have an objectively caused crisis of trust. Right? You can't fix that crisis by going around trying to swat disinformation away. Okay? You've got to admit to the voters that this stuff is real and it's not happening because they've made a mistake. The voters have made a mistake. The second thing you've got to do is just reverse the natural order in a technocratic society of policy decision and consent. Let's take immigration. The tendency has been to take in lots of people into your country and then try to persuade voters that that's a reasonable idea. Reverse it. Start with what voters feel on the doorstep. What they feel is not the final stopping point. You can engage with it. You can try to shift them, but you have to start with civic consent first. And if you've dramatically failed to get civic consent for a policy, you can't do the policy. Even though you have some really good expertise-based reasons for it, like the economy needs this, you still can't do it. Because if you keep piling on policies that contravene civic consent, you're just going to lose your democracy. You're going to be run by Putin, basically. So that's important, that reversal of order, right? You can do it the technocratic way if you have a highly depolarized, homogeneous, high trust, high solidarity society. We just don't have that. When you have that, you can say, we're a government, you trust us, so we're going to get on and fix some things, right? And then we'll tell you how we did it. That's perfectly fine in a different historical moment. It's not fine today. I think another thing that's really important, this might be our third brainstorming point today, is that you are incredibly sensitive about how you tell people that you're deciding against them. Right? So let's say you're going to slow down your pursuit of net zero. How do you speak to people who believe we need to get to net zero ASAP? Or you want to accelerate to net zero. How do you tell people who say, well, what our country does is a drop in the ocean. The Chinese are going to do what they do. India's going to do what they do. Russia's going to do what it does. And so aren't we just ruining our economy for the sake of a goal that's actually not going to be effective on a global scale? And you've got sort of absolute clarity of position, vision, and outrage on both sides. How do you tell the side you've decided against? And obviously, you know what I think about the climate crisis. I'm an alarmist about the climate crisis. This is just a hypothetical example. You've got to tell them that you've decided against them, but it doesn't mean that they're wrong. So they've lost out on this decision. They've lost, but they're not wrong. Which means two things. A, you're respecting the reasons and the values on the basis of which they had that commitment. You're giving them credit for it being something more than just a whim or a want or a desire that's got overruled. And then secondly, you're giving them the faith that in a democratic society, that argument can get re-legislated and they can win the next time round. And that's an amazing way of diffusing resentment. The next thing I think I have in mind, maybe our fourth point today, is that you've got to largely treat people who treat you as an enemy as opponents. So Nigel Farage might treat Andy Burnham as mostly an enemy of Britain. Andy Burnham should not treat Farage as an enemy of Britain in response. You might think, but this is so unfair. How can I be asked to participate in this? People are calling me their enemy and I have to call them my opponents and create this horrible inequality in our relationship that works against me? Yeah, you do. Why? Because power. What do you not want? You don't want Trumps and Farages to be in power, if you're roughly in our demographic. Because even if they have the right picture of certain grievances, they're not going to be able to address them because they're irresponsible political actors once they get into power. So the problem here is that if you think about power and not losing to these people, you have to understand that the politics of enemies is the enemy of democracy. And so you're being made to participate on their terms in political life when you call them enemies back. And that means that you're actually increasing their chances of beating you in elections, if you're still going to have elections. Right? Other exceptions to this, yes, of course. There are plenty of exceptions, and they're to do with a high bar that needs to be cleared for something like, threats of violence. So somebody can be called an enemy by you if they cross that kind of threshold. But if they just go around saying you're an enemy of Britain, 4 times out of 5, the right thing to do is to treat them, and especially their voters, as opponents, not enemies. Last remark. what we've got in contemporary politics is a kind of crisis of confidence among centre-right, centre-left, centrist politicians in engaging with voters with a view to changing what voters think and feel. Vlad, doesn't that just contradict what you've said earlier, that you've got to start with sentiments on the doorstep? No. You've got to value what people say on the doorstep. You've got to start with what people say on the doorstep. But it doesn't mean you can't constructively and transformatively engage with what people say on the doorstep. What you shouldn't do is ignore the doorstep and have a technocratic set of solutions. But you absolutely engage. And one of the problems is that contemporary politicians feel assailed on all sides. And above all, they feel assailed by the fact that they're in danger of passing power to ex-conservative, post-truth, anti-democratic authoritarians. And so they don't want to put a step wrong. But that defensive stance actually undermines your ability to hear what Ricky and Samantha in Crawley have to say on the particular policy you're implementing. And engaging with what Ricky and Samantha have to say. And maybe changing their mind. Maybe having the confidence to tell them, I hear loud and clear that you have a strong view and you feel strongly about that bit of the issue. But don't you also have feelings about this other bit of the issue? And they might say, okay. Maybe. Well, try to persuade me. That's ordinary politics. And unfortunately, contemporary sort of defensive posture in our political elites means that politicians have got terrible at doing this. You have to treat voters as though they contain, to be kitsch about this, multitudes within them. There are 8 dimensions to a voter's positioning in a certain historical moment. 2 or 3 are going to be expressed. You have the ability to engage with the other 5 or 6 to try to bring them out. Right? That's not you condescending voters. That's not you telling voters what to think. That's not you making technocratic decisions behind their backs and then sharing them with you and saying, tough luck, deal with it. That's you understanding that there's something incredibly powerful and magical about political process and political participation. And that you've got to understand what kind of a good that is. And you've got to be virtuous in relation to that good. You've got to develop the kind of, bits of skill, kind of bits of capacity that make you good at transformatively interacting with other people in your political environment. That's what leadership is. Okay? And so in this outgoing Starmer administration, you had too many people who did this. Ricky and Samantha in Crawley say, what? Oh, okay, God. Oh, that's not good for us. Oh, that's another vote for Farage. Ooh, okay, let's not put a foot wrong. No. Hi, Ricky and Samantha. We hear you. Have you also thought about that, though? Right? So you've got to engage with the multifacetedness nature of voters, and that requires confidence. Okay. Thank you so much for helping me brainstorm. This is an important part of our democratic conversation we've just had a little session on, which is how our leaders speak to us and how we all speak to one another, and we're going to carry that conversation on. Lots of love. Talk to you soon.